Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome, another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these very critical times. I am your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. We focus, as Canada, and I guess most of the world has been focusing over the last couple of days, on the G7 meeting in Kananaskis. Trump got there actually on Monday morning, flew in late in the evening, of course, with his stupid MAGA hat on, but I guess that's part of the motif. That's part of the get-up now, no matter where he is or what he's wearing. He's always got the MAGA hat on. Anyway, he also had a one-to-one meeting with Prime Minister Carney, first thing on Monday morning, 11 o'clock our time, I think it was, when they actually had the meeting. And then a quick presser after that, the two of them standing side by side there. And I think it was about 6 or 7 minutes long with a couple of quick statements and then some media questions. And looking at some of the social media posts about those who were watching, as I was, sure most of us were, to try to get some sort of a gist as to what was going to be happening and what kind of things are being discussed between the two gentlemen. And then Prime Minister Carney stepped up and said, okay, I'm exercising my role here as the chairman of this whole thing. We got to move on. So we're going to limit this right now. And some people jumped out of social media right off the bat and said, oh, he's cutting off the press conference. He's trying to save Trump's butt because Trump was rambling on. Yeah, no kidding, right? That's what Trump does, is ramble on time and time again, and usually incoherently, and he was starting to get along that way. My sense of it, and again, I'm watching along, I don't have any inside information aside from my experience covering politics and being in politics for a while. What Carney was basically doing was trying to focus his time, his very short allotted time, face-to-face time with Trump, to try to get to the bottom of the tariff issue and the trade issues that are crippling our economy and frankly, crippling the American economy too, although Trump doesn't seem to understand that. Here's what you got to understand. There is a limited time in meetings like this and in conferences like this for leaders to have a one-on-one time, face-to-face time. And invariably, it's because they both have schedules. The Prime Minister, of course, is the chair of these meetings, so he's got responsibilities. Trump had a meeting with Carney first thing in the morning, other meetings scheduled right after that. And I know they've got their people along there saying, come on. You don't want to be late for this meeting, or you're going to piss that person off or that person off. There's only a limited amount of time, and Trump tends to want to wander and kind of, go on and on and on with his answers. The other element to it was if you had watched the media scrum that was happening there, most of the questions had very little to do with the G7 and the G7 agenda. It seemed to be the American media that were dominating the questions. They followed Trump along there, and they've got questions about his birthday parade, the waste of time, and especially the waste of money, having his grandiose military parade downtown Washington, in which he was on the reviewing stand and fell asleep, so what else is new? And, of course, the protests against Trump that happened. Millions of people, of course, protesting in cities right across America on Saturday about Trump and his policies and his authoritarian rule. All legitimate questions. The problem here is that, he's only going to be there for a few hours. Carney wants to have this one-on-one. Carney wants to come away from this meeting and maybe even this conference with at least something tangible to say, look, I got this for us. And I know that, as we've talked about in previous podcasts, that's trying to nail Jello to the wall to try to get Trump to commit to anything. And even if he does on a Monday, he may change his mind by Wednesday. Sometimes he may change his mind by Monday afternoon, but I understand all those difficulties and all those challenges. But you're not going to get that if Trump is going to spend what time he has there talking with the American media about something that's not really relevant to what's going to be happening on the G7. The economic issues are paramount among the other members, including Canada, about the G7. The Ukraine war, because Zelensky is there, of course, and is going to be interested to see just what kind of a commitment, if any, he's going to get from the G7 about ongoing support for Ukraine. And, of course, the Israeli attacks on Iran over the last weekend, the back and forth that seems to go on now, certainly that's got to be talked about. And that's got to be part of the discussion, because as we've said just the other day on the podcast, nothing works independent of itself. This is not a silo situation. Of course, military action and instability is going to have an impact on economic issues. And that's going to have to be discussed. It probably wasn't on the agenda a week ago, and now it is. So to waste time, and that's really what it was, a waste of time, American journalists just trying to get a soundbite or a snippet or something controversial from Trump, which is not that difficult, I suppose, is really not relevant and is not going to move the agenda forward for the G7, which is why Carney tried to rush him over there. I don't know if he had any more time to talk to Trump about anything, although they did talk a little bit about tariffs, and it was instructive, shall we say. Trump tried as much as I guess he can, given little information and especially what little knowledge he has about the economic economic issues to try to sound as if, yeah, we're working on something and there's a deal possible. He didn't say there was a deal imminent, but a deal possible. However, as is usually the case with Trump, about 20 seconds later, he also mentioned that, well, yeah, Trump, what was his phrase now? I'm a tariff guy. I believe in them. I always have, and the tariffs are going to have to stay. Well, that's a deal breaker for Canada, and seems to be a deal breaker for Trump. If his feeling of the tariffs on steel and aluminum and lumber and some of the other draconian issues to do with the tariffs he's imposed on Canada are going to stay in place, not a whole lot else to negotiate then, is there? It kind of reminded me as I was watching him. Remember the movie Love Actually, one of my favorite movies. Hugh Grant, of course, in that movie plays the UK Prime Minister, who just recently elected Prime Minister. And you may recall there was a state visit. The American president is going to 10 Downing Street to talk to Prime Minister, of the time, and of course played by Hugh Grant. The U.S. president played by Billy Bob Thornton very effectively. It was good. It was a good movie, great acting. But anyway, you maybe remember when they were having the closed door session, Billy Bob Thornton says to Hugh Grant, president to Prime Minister, "I'll give you anything you want, as long as it's something I don't mind giving up." And that seems to be the mindset of the Americans going into these negotiations. Yeah, we can talk about a deal and we can negotiate that, but we don't want to talk about the tariffs. We don't want to talk about eliminating tariffs. But what else do you want to put on the table? Maybe we can find some agreement. Well, as far as the Canadians are concerned, and a number of other countries too, tariffs are all that matters. I mean, that is the key issue right now when it comes to economic stability for our country, especially. Americans have got to reconsider this as they have in the past. Is there going to be some kind of tariff? Probably. But Trump just blindly seems to follow this ideology that the tariffs are good. And he's still preaching the idea that, well, the Canadian government is the one that's going to pay these tariffs, and Americans are going to be better off because there's all this money coming into their coffers, none of which is true. Of course, we know that it's the people that import the steel or the aluminum, if in fact they're going to do that, that pay the tariff. So it's the American companies that pay that. And of course, those companies, as has always been the case, pass that cost on to the consumer, whether it's the builder for some of these major construction projects, or whether it's you and me doing a backyard deck or whatever the case. Lumber's going to cost more, steel's going to cost more. Everybody loses. But Trump doesn't get that, or maybe he does and just doesn't give a damn. I don't know. I hate to spend a whole lot of my time or waste a lot of my time trying to get inside his head, but that seems to be his mindset. So is there going to be a deal? Likely not. I just don't see it happening as long as the Americans have this whole idea about tariffs are here to stay. And if Canada doesn't like them, well, too bad, so sad. Now, he did not go on about the 51st state thing, at least so far anyway, in his discussions with the Prime Minister. Seems to like the guy. There seems to be some sort of a cordial relationship, although, a lot of the things that Carney says can be, there's a double entendre to an awful lot of those. Remember the first meeting they had in the White House where Carney said that he was a transformational president. Well, you can take that two ways. And he also mentioned that, that this is the anniversary. It's Trump's birthday, of course, this past weekend, as we talked about. But it's also the anniversary of the G7 in itself, 50th anniversary of that. And Trump said that, the G7 could not survive without the strength of the American support. Well, he didn't say Trump support. He said the American support. And on that basis, in that mindset, he's right. The Americans are the big dog, of course, in G7, G20, NATO. They're the ones that carry an awful lot of the weight. Trump is not willing to carry that weight. He's not willing to exert that authority, at least not for good anyway. But he'd stop short of suggesting or crediting Trump with anything to do with any of the positivity that could come out of this. Trump was rambling on once again about bringing back Russia into the G7, suggesting that it was Justin Trudeau and Barack Obama that booted Putin out back in the day, seemingly to forget about the fact that it was the whole entire G7, or G8 at that time, that booted Putin out. It was because he invaded Crimea. All right, a blatant act of war. It had nothing to do with personal like or dislike, and it wasn't just Trudeau and Obama. It was every other member nation that wanted Putin out. And of course, Putin doubled down with his invasion of Ukraine, which is ongoing now. There's no way in God's green earth that they're going to allow this guy back in, okay? Not given the fact that he has this penchant for trying to recreate the Soviet Union and the glory days of the Soviet Union. Trump is buddy-buddy with Putin. There's a number of other suggestions we could talk about how intense that relationship is. I don't want to go down that road this time, but he's always going to sing that song. And we just have to accept it and say, yeah. Go ahead and let him meander and wander into that and back out of it again into whatever else he's going to talk about. But it's not helping anybody to do that. Not going to happen. And we need to focus in the short period of time that these leaders are all together in Alberta to try to find some economic solutions, because they're all hurting. And I know that, Carney said talks with the UK Prime Minister and certainly with Macron and the Japanese Prime Minister about establishing stronger trade relationships. And they do the handshake and say, hey, we got a deal in principle. Well, there's a lot of details to be worked out on that. And with the United States situation, well, you double down on that simply because there's no framework right now. What was the framework was the revised NAFTA deal. And of course, Trump has essentially torn that up and said he doesn't want to play ball anymore. So Carney's task here is monumental, if not impossible, to try to get some sort of a deal. However, there seems to be at least a foundation for some sort of a relationship here between the two. And Carney has been biting his tongue, I'm sure, in an awful lot of the stuff that he probably wanted to say about Trump and certainly to Trump. You got to tread lightly. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Trump is carrying the ball or dominating the session. But the United States and their policies to do with trade issues are dominating this. And I know some are suggesting, well, Carney should be taking a much harder stance and playing hardball with them. What do you think you're going to get? What do you think the Canadians would get if he stood there and said, you know what, you're a jerk, you're an idiot, and you're screwing our economy around, and your tariffs are just, they're terrible, and you really don't know what you're doing. You got your head up your, you know what? You really think Trump's going to say, you know what, you're right. Let's start all over again. He's not. You know darn well how Trump would respond to that. So it would be idiotic for Trump or for Carney or any other world leader to approach Trump in that fashion. You kind of have to go in the side door to try to get what you want from this guy. And, if it takes a little sidestep and a little moving along and in a roundabout way complimenting Trump, well, so be it. But at the risk of tarnishing your own integrity, I guess. And I don't think Carney's done that or even come close. But you've got to play a very, very tough game, but at the same time, you've got to be strategic about this too, knowing who the adversary is, which is Trump, how they're going to respond to this too. So Carney is playing this as best as he can. Is it to whether or not he's going to actually come out of this with anything for Canada by the end of this conference? Highly unlikely. I'd love to think yes. I want to say yes, we will. But it just doesn't seem that it's, to use Trump's old phrase from his meeting with Zelensky, we don't have the cards. I think we do, frankly, but we just haven't played them yet. More to come on this, and more to come on that relationship between Canada and the U.S., but I don't think it's going to happen in Kananaskis. I think it's going to happen in the negotiations that are going on between Ottawa and Washington, and more importantly, the negotiations that are going on in Washington between American governors and the president and his administration. Don't forget that as this is going on in Kananaskis, a whole bunch of premiers, including Doug Ford, are down in Boston talking to East Coast governors about trying to strengthen trade relations between Canada and the U.S. Now, that seems to be at cross purposes with what Trump is saying. So who's going to bend the president's ear? Maybe Mark Carney. Most importantly, though, the American governors who, let's face it, are looking at midterm elections, and so are the Republicans in the House and the Congress. They're the ones that could be influenced by this, and a word in the ear from some of those U.S. governors might actually have a lot more impact than what we're going to get from this 2 or 3 day meeting that's going on in Alberta. Anyway, time will tell, but at least they seem to be playing their cards properly right now. But I think this is laying the foundation for hopefully what's going to come later. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. You can pick us up wherever you get your podcast, whatever platform you're using. We're there. Lots of stuff going, of course, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and anywhere else. And as always, we do, when we post these, we do add some background information and related stories. Check those out, too, as you're reading the podcast, and use those to try to enhance the discussion and the feedback that we're going to get. And keep that feedback coming. Love to get your responses to the podcasts, either pro or con. I'd like to think that what we want to do here is create not changes of opinion, but dialogue, exchange of ideas. So, without the animosity, we don't need that anymore. It's counterproductive to what we're doing. But talking about these issues is exactly what we have to be doing these days. And I hope that this podcast is helping us to not just generate that, but to encourage other people to jump on board too. Thanks as always to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this one together. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed. Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.